ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with us talking about legislative call to action our Senator Espero, Representative Della, our Belatti, and Chris Gard. Give them a big round of applause.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for attending. A little bit of an introduction for our Senator Espero over here. And Representative Belatti, working very hard in our last legislative sessions over the past couple of years to really get us to where we are, providing us with the opportunity not only to hold a Cannabis Expo, but legitimizing cannabis use in a medicinal fashion for all of us in the state of Hawaii, really moving forward and being very progressive. Folks, any opening words that you want to say about why you're here today and how we got here in particular? Aside from the Pro Bowl traffic that held you up.
Aloha, everyone. Yes, we're in a new era when it comes to medical cannabis, as you all know. We passed legislation in 2000, 15 years ago. And I know you're clapping, but sadly it took us this long to finally get a dispensary bill passed. And that basically has been the catalyst for the last few months. This expo, Chris and his organization, and what Representative Della and I are working on for this session. We certainly believe that the 13,000 patients, which we currently have, can easily grow to 15, 20,000, and who just knows how many. But we're part of that national trend, as you know. We've got some states who have legalized, but more importantly, almost half of the states have medical cannabis, with many more taking it up this session. So we're a part of that dialogue, you're a part of that dialogue, and we're looking forward to working with all of you, with Chris, to make sure that what we have started continues, we become more progressive, and we will have the quality, safe medicine for those who need it. Thank you very much.
It's so wonderful to see all of you here. I see some familiar faces, but more importantly, I think I see a lot of new faces. And I think what's really important about today and about the next few months is that we have an opportunity, you have an opportunity to continue to shape this industry, to shape the culture that's developing, to shape and ensure the access for patients and for all cannabis users here in the state of Hawaii. We have a lot more work to do. I agree with Senator Espero that it's sad that it took us 15, 16 years to get to this point, but we are in a period of incredible change, and it may come very quickly. So all of you sitting right here, you have this opportunity to engage with us and help us shape what the cannabis culture, what the cannabis laws are going to look like for the future of Hawaii, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Senator. Folks, when they talk about direct influence to the political process, that's what our group, the Hawaii Dispensary Alliance, is for. We take your membership and your voice, we mobilize it into something clear and concise, and we approach the ledge, and obviously it's working. We've come a very long way, and of course with them lending an ear and their help, here we are. So let's talk real quick. There's a lot of legislation out there, some great, some pretty bad. I'm sure we'll hear about that right now, or at some point. But can you give us just a quick view of the agenda, your agenda, for the cannabis industry from a legislative perspective?
So, bill introduction was last week, Wednesday, and we now essentially have all the bills in play. There are 20 bills, medical marijuana-related bills in the House, and 13 bills in the Senate. 7 of those bills are overlapping, which means we actually share a lot in common with the Senate. There are basically 5 areas where all these bills cover. The first of interest to many of you here are patient-related proposals that do things like address the problem of temporary certification. Many of you may be having problems with your cards getting certified, so we're looking at fixes for that so that there's no long delay. There's also discussion about the expansion of the debilitating conditions to include things like anxiety, insomnia, a whole other range of conditions which are not currently included. That's one. The second kind of area of reforms being proposed are with respect to harmonizing the criminal penal statutes with medical use. So as part of the compromise from last session, there were additional crimes and penalties that were added that made some things like access of retail dispensaries, unauthorized access to production centers, Class A felonies, Class C felonies. So we're working to, some folks are wanting to criminalize those penalties. There's another area of laws that are looking at the clarification of the Department of Health rules relating to dispensaries. So many of you have already expressed your concern that the Department of Health rules kind of don't make sense. They don't allow greenhouses. They don't define plants. They don't provide for inter-island transport. So there's a whole series of proposals out there that are going to address the rules. A fourth area is about structural changes to the dispensary system. And by that I mean, thanks to Senator Espero, the Senate is going to begin the discussion about horizontal organization versus the vertical structure that we currently have. We also have bills that are going to be looking at how do we get our medical school more involved in the medical research aspect. So that's, again, another structural change. Finally, the fifth area where we're going to be looking at is government oversight reforms. Last session, there was a lot of discussion about how do we get the counties involved. So one of the things that both House and Senate are looking at is a commission, much like they have citizen commissions in other states. Both sides of the chambers are looking at commissions that can provide input to the Department of Health. They include, on the House side, appointees from the mayors, so we get county involvement, and so there's those kinds of things that are going on. So for me, those are the 5 big areas, and it might resonate with you in one of those things. We're going to have bills on all of those topics discussed. So that's from my perspective. Senator?
Okay, what I'll do is just share with you some of my bills. First of all, let me mention a website, capital.hawaii.gov. Capital.hawaii.gov. And if you know the bill numbers, you can check out all the bills, capital.hawaii.gov. Or if you don't know the bill number, just put in medical cannabis, medical marijuana, and all the bills will pop up. From that website, you can track the bills. You can even testify from that website, from the confines of your home, your office, wherever you may be. So it's very easy to keep in touch. And it's important that if you are a supporter, if you are a patient, if you know individuals, and you want to continue with this effort that we're doing now, we need you. We need you to help us get these bills through. So a few that I've introduced, for example, some of the bills are just to fix what's in the current law. For example, for some reason, and I don't have an answer, last session we put in our bill, you can't sell medical cannabis on Sundays. Now why we did that, I don't know. It must have been that Mormon caucus. But we're going to hopefully change that because it just doesn't make any sense that you can't sell on Sundays. Representative Belatti mentioned about the temporary registration. I know Dr. Otto's out there somewhere. We've been working with the Department of Health. There's been a lag time between when physicians certify a person and when they actually get their card, and we're hoping to close that gap. I've got a bill specifically to add insomnia, anxiety, arthritis, and stress. The issue regarding horizontal, vertical, which Rep. Belatti briefly touched on, basically the licenses we're going to give out this year, there are 8 of them. And it will be a vertical system, meaning one license, a person can grow, manufacture edibles or what we ingest, and retail. I'm hoping that as we expand the system, which the Department of Health will have the opportunity to expand it in 2017 at the soonest. We don't have to in 2017, but it can be. But my preference and other legislators is that we want to open up the industry to more residents. And that would mean if somebody wants to just apply to grow, you can just apply to grow. If you want to apply just to manufacture oils or lotions or whatever the case may be, you can apply just to do that. And then if you want to do a retail establishment, you can do a retail. You know, from my perspective and others, that provides more opportunities for our local residents. It might provide more competition, lower prices, and maybe keep the price within a very, very reasonable range that we can one day eliminate and or at least seriously hurt the black market. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're going to have to do. If the prices that these dispensaries charge are not lower than the black market, then the black market will be our competitor. Common sense. So that's one area we're certainly looking at and taking out that criminal element that is in our neighborhoods and other areas in our communities. She mentioned also the commission, which makes a lot of sense. An area tied to medical cannabis is hemp. The University of Hawaii just completed an R&D study. Hemp is illegal at both the state and federal level. However, at the federal level, they allow hemp production if it's tied to research and development. So we just had a 2-year program and pilot, and the results of it were outstanding. And you heard that when the sugarcane closed in Maui, a lot of people are looking at maybe hemp production, because as you know, hemp, I believe, has 20,000 uses, whether it's food, whether it's textile and clothing, whether it's fuel. And on Maui, there is a home built out of hemp. My bill would allow the Department of Agriculture to continue research and development efforts to look at hemp as a construction material. Because if we can turn hemp into a construction material, the possibilities are affordable housing initiatives using local hemp. Just makes a lot of sense without having to import wood and all these other things. Obviously not eliminated, but hemp as a building block can change not only Hawaii, and if we can be the leader in R&D in developing this, it could literally change the world, and we could be at the forefront. So these are some of the measures that we'll be looking at and passing. Let me look at my phone here to make sure we touched on both of them. And I do believe that we have the momentum to get some of these measures passed. You know, we certainly don't want to fall behind like we did the last dozen years. We need to be at the forefront, and we're working with the EGA administration and the Department of Health. Right now, all applications are in, and they will be announcing the winners, if you want to call it that, April 15th, okay? So it's tax time and it's medical cannabis time, April 15th, okay? So some of you are going to be bummed out you have to pay taxes, and some of you are going to be elated that you possibly hit the the gold mine of the 21st century. But it's imperative that we do it right. And we've been working with the other states. We've been looking at their success and their failures. We've been looking at best practices, and we are hoping to develop model legislation that the rest of the nation can follow. And with your support, with Chris and his organizations, we can pass some good legislation this session as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Very inspirational words. Representative, any legislation in particular, especially bill numbers, that you want our audience to track or check, that you really need support on, or perhaps on the other side, maybe in the end? Is there any legislation that is counter to what we've been working towards that you would like for our audience and our membership to speak up against?
I'll take the positive first. The House Omnibus Bill, the House bill that's going to have the most reforms in it, will be House Bill 2707, HB 2707.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen, take that down. House Bill 2707. That's right, that's really important to getting everything, all of the amendments and all the changes fast-tracked forward for the future of the industry as well as care. So write that one down. That's going to be really important. Sorry, come in.
So what we'll see in the House is that bill will cover a lot of the things that I've already talked about. It also includes a couple of interesting things, like we are looking at, the House is proposing that APRNs, Advanced Practice Registered Nurses, be allowed to certify patients. So there is one other state that allows that, and we want to make sure that there is access to healthcare professionals. There's a bunch of other things in there, definitions for plants, exemptions for allowing the transport for testing purposes from inter-island transport for testing purposes from between Kauai and say Oahu. So again, a lot's in that stuff. Now in terms of what are bad bills, I know that some of it has been making the rounds for you. There are some bills that I would say maybe are counter to what this industry needs. So for example, things like the prohibition of home grow. That has been in the news, House Bill 1680. That isn't something that a whole lot of people are supporting in the legislature. But the way our legislative system works is everybody gets to put their idea on the table. So that is out there, but I don't think that that has a whole lot of support in either House or Senate. So very, very unlikely. Still important for you to track that bill. That's House Bill 1680, but highly unlikely to move. There's other bills. It depends on who you are. There's one bill out there that talks about price controls and setting price controls. Now, that's a little tricky to do because, one, I don't know that the department is able to do that. And I don't know that at this time we want to set price controls because then that doesn't allow the market to work in the way that it needs to. We need to give flexibility to the dispensaries to set the prices. They need to be flexible when they are the lucky licensee to make sure that the medicine is available and affordable, but we also have to let them recoup their costs. So I think like in many other states, we're going to see a fluctuation and we have to be comfortable for that. And then we have to stand ready to have the conversations about, do we need to have another licensee open up? Do we need to push on the horizontal faster? All of these things are questions that we're going to have to develop. Finally, there are some other bills that would authorize the counties to come in and basically prohibit the placement of dispensaries in certain places. Those again are coming from some of the counties, Big Island in particular, but there's no real support from the state side to allow that to happen. Because if we start to allow the counties to essentially what they call zone out dispensaries, we're going to see a very patchwork quilt of regulation that will be damaging to the industry as a whole. Now, if you were to tell me that we were in a period of legalization, at that point, maybe the counties will have more authority because they do have more authority over things like the sale of alcohol. But we're not talking about legalization. We're not talking about legalization. We are right now talking about access to medicine, and that really is a state authority at the moment. So there's also very little, I think, willingness to go down that route. Those are what that does to it.
Absolutely. Senator, any comment on that?
And actually, just to briefly touch on it, because people do ask about legalization, my best guess is that within 5 to 10 years, maybe, but in the recent legislative sessions, the Senate has passed decriminalization bills. And the 4 states that currently have legalization went the medical cannabis, decriminalization, legalization route. Decriminalization is a possibility if we can convince the House. So it is imperative for you folks to call your legislators, and if you support decriminalization, you have to convince your House members, because the Senate has always supported it. And that's not to put our representative on the spot, but I mean, that's just how it is at the legislature. One bill I also want to mention that I forgot to is, I do have a bill that would allow one more dispensary on the Big Island. Because the Big Island does have the geography and the patience, and I'm of the opinion that one more would probably be beneficial. So we'll see whether that happens or not. But certainly, the measure that we have now also talks about in 2018 ending caregivers working with patients. And I know that's a little controversial, and there are patients who have approached me and said, we need to change that. And I see that discussion going on. I don't know if it's going to happen this session, but certainly it'll happen next session. So just stay tuned on that one, because the law will have a few things kick in, including reciprocation with the mainland, so patients will be able to come here and get their medicine, and hopefully we'll be able to go to their states and use medication if you're a registered patient. So those are some things to look at, but certainly I want to try to get the discussion on the horizontal system, because I don't expect that to happen and pass this year unless I am pleasantly surprised. However, I do feel that we need to begin that discussion this year on whether we want to have a horizontal system, get more of the local residents involved, and I do expect that the number of patients are going to increase. So it's going to be, I think, needed for us. Thank you.
So if my bill is House Bill 2707, the bill that you need to watch for Senator is Senate Bill 2307. 2307, Senate Bill 2307.
That's right, companion bill is what it would be called.
They're not companions,
Okay.
they're in different bills. But I think if you're interested in the horizontal discussion, then Senate Bill 2307 is the one to watch.
Thank you for that clarification.
The other thing I would add to this discussion about adding a new dispensary on Big Island, the other thing to add is that in the House there's a very interesting bill that would allow the county governments to open up a dispensary. So listen to that carefully. It's a proposal to allow county government to operate a dispensary. There is one county, I believe, in Washington that does that. So that's an interesting development, and that could lead to each county having another dispensary. I don't know where that discussion is going to go, but it's a very interesting proposal.
And what bill number is that, Representative?
That bill number is, I gotta look for it, House Bill 2621.
2621. Very good. So, Senator, did you have something to say?
I was going to add that if you want to testify, call either of our offices. And if you call my office, I will put you on my mailing list, because we do contact people and say, these bills are up, we need you to testify. Because we don't need you to testify once. We need you to testify 4, 5, 6 times. Because the bills have to go through both houses. And much of the testimony will be repetitive, but that's the system. You don't just testify once and it's out. We need to show that there's momentum and that throughout the whole legislative process, people are continuing to support these measures.
Absolutely. Again, direct influence to the Senate and the House is very imperative. And of course, the Hawaii Dispensary Alliance can provide that as well. Let us know what you need and what you want. And again, we have the ear of the ledge. So we will be happy to provide your sentiments to them in a very rational and well-approached demeanor. Let's go back to the rules though. We've had the Department of Health take over not only the patient registry, but they've been awarded or provided oversight of the dispensary program. And maybe some of the rules that they've come out with have been a little bit interesting, perhaps even overreaching than the language provided. Is there any potential for legislation in the upcoming session that would interact or perhaps change those rules?
Right, in order for us to push this program out, we gave the Department of Health almost a carte blanche to put together the rules and then begin the implementation. And that's why we're able to hopefully get everything up and running and have the first dispensaries within the next 6 months. It's that fast. July 15th. Now I don't expect the whole system statewide to be at 100% throttle, full capacity. That's not going to happen. But the Department of Health does have the rules. They can change them as well at any time. And this interim rule period that we've given them is a 2-year period. And then if we want to, we in the legislature can make changes, and that's where there's some bills. For instance, there's a discussion about greenhouses and whether a grower can use a greenhouse. It's been a little fuzzy in the answer because the law states that the grow site, the plants must be in a secured facility. Those are the primary words in the bill. A secured facility, one that has a fence, that has cameras, and that you cannot look into. But we've been told that there are greenhouses that fit that bill. So at the end of the day, it's going to be up to the Department of Health to determine whether one's grow site or grow facility is a greenhouse or not, and then whether it fits our requirements to grow. Because one of the issues, as you may have heard, is energy costs. And if you have a completely secured 4 walls and a roof, it's going to cost a lot of money with the grow lights and everything else. And it just makes so much sense that one day that we could maybe have an open room that can get sunlight in, or that you can have a facility that has glass that allows sunlight in. This is something that we are going to be looking at this session, I believe, and Representative Belatti might have more on this.
So, in the world of laws and rules, it's really important to remember that laws trump rules. Laws trump rules. So there are proposals that will directly change some rules that have already been set, or in some instances where the department has remained silent. So for example, we talked about plants. The legislature in the last bill never defined what a plant is, but we said that there's a limitation of 3,000 plants per production center and per retail, or per production center. So I had expected that the Department of Health would take that authority that we gave them and define plants. They did not. They did not define plant. So we have gone in and we have made a proposal to define plant using the definition that Washington uses. Now some of you here I know are expert growers. You may not like that definition. You may want the definition of a flowering plant that's yay high, so big or whatever. But this is where you're going to have the opportunity when we have the discussion about what is the definition of plant. You can agree with the Washington definition, you can tell us to change it, or you can say don't define it at all and let it be. So that's the kind of thing that we can do with the law. We can write things that will trump what the rules have said. There's another area where the rules are a little bit unclear, and what I'm not certain about is where the Department of Health got their information. But in House Bill 2707, there's actual law about lab testing. So I know here in this crowd, there's a lot of you who might be interested in lab testing. There is some conversation among industry experts that Hawaii didn't get the lab testing quite right. So we are looking, by putting it into a bill, we are looking to have a conversation with the Department of Health to explain why did you want 10 parts per million for hexane versus what some other state has, which is 150 parts per million for hexane. Those are the kinds of questions that we're going to be dealing with, and we want, at the end of the day, through the conversation, we want the department to be able to explain to us what was your justification for using this, and if we disagree with you, we will use our authority as the House and the Senate to say, okay, we understand what you did, but all right, this is where our judgment is, and this is what we think it should be moving forward. Now, some of that, some people will say, is the legislature getting a little bit too far into the details of things, but I think the way that this is rolled out, I am comfortable that what we are doing is appropriate and that it's going to help advance the lab testing, it's going to help advance patient safety, and reassure people that the system we've built is based on the best science that we know and the best evidence and the best practices that we both have examined as legislators, that we've asked the department to have examined, and that we've engaged the public in the discussion-making process.
Fair enough. Yes, sir.
Let me add that, government sometimes is too conservative and too cautious. And our bureaucrats and the Department of Health folks, some of them do fit to that hole. However, we believe that we've been progressive in our thinking and that it's way overdue. For example, we had a hearing recently and I was all over the Department of Health because they said that in these dispensaries, they will not be able to sell marijuana cigarettes. Okay? Now, we visited some dispensaries on the mainland in Colorado, Washington, saw how they're set up. Fine, no problem, all types of products. But I was just a little flabbergasted in why wouldn't you sell a medical cannabis product, a cigarette, at a medical cannabis retail establishment? And they really didn't give me a good answer except that, well, the Department of Health normally, we're against smoking. Okay, that's fine, but this is not your traditional discussion on smoking and the anti-smoking efforts towards our children in schools, in high school. This is medical cannabis smoking. So at this stage, they're not going to sell, they're not going to sell. I think it's a little ironic, but these are areas that we are still working with them, and hopefully, they'll understand that if a person goes in there and they have arthritis and they can't roll, and since our law restricts many edibles, how do you expect that product to be ingested? By the way, I did forget to mention one bill, Senate Bill 2308. Senate Bill 2308 will establish a working group to make recommendations on edibles. because right now the law only allows oils, tinctures, a few other things, but the area that is clearly lacking that many people ask about, what about the lollipop type, the candy-like substances? What about cookies? What about brownies? Those type of things. And those are very legitimate questions because for some people, eating the cannabis is something that is useful and works. And if the Department of Health doesn't want you smoking it, logically, then why don't you allow them to eat it or drink it, right? So hopefully that's a discussion that we could have this session, because the law today allows the Department of Health, if they wanted to, they could add these ailments that I said, they could add edibles. But because of their conservative side and their side of erring on the side of caution, it's going to take a little more time than what many of us want.
So I just want to build on what Senator Espero said. Senate Bill 2308 is a very interesting, very exciting bill, but what I'd like to, and this is news, this is breaking news for all of you who came here to this Cannabis Expo, what we'll likely be doing is we're going to convert that into a concurrent resolution because it doesn't need to be by bill. And much like the working group we had that has actually spawned all of this dispensary talk, we are likely going to have a concurrent resolution that will create that working group. And we had on that working group, a previous one that led to the dispensary law, we had numerous patients and patient advocates that were members of that working group. So it'll probably very much be similar to that. And if you have a particular interest in advancing that conversation about what edibles might look like, then you need to stay tuned and make sure you follow both Senate Bill 2308. And when that resolution comes out, it will be via resolution that we create a working group that will invite the public to come participate. And I think that will have a date of recommendations to the 2017 legislature. So start marking your calendars, because if you want to get involved, that's a perfect place for citizen involvement.
That's pretty groundbreaking news right there. So a concurrent resolution that could fast track relatively.
It would fast track the discussion so that group would then make recommendations to the next legislature about what edibles might look like here in the state of Hawaii.
All right. There we go. So concurrent resolution coming up, ladies and gentlemen. Just a heads up, make sure you track that. But we've already established the rules through legislation. And how quickly would the legislature be to amend or correct the rules? Or would they be willing to? Do we have to wait until the end of this session for everything to kind of transpire to the next realm? We do. We have to wait for the governor's signature then. So
unless we fast track a bill, but everybody wants their bills fast tracked. There were over 2,000 bills introduced. At the end of the day, we'll only pass between 200 to 300. But these bills will be just like every other bill, because people will say, well, why don't you fast track homelessness bills? Why don't you fast track police reform bills? I'll throw that out, because that's another group of bills I'm pushing, police reform. And so, at the soonest, the session ends the first week in May. And then the bills could take effect at that time, but then the governor has 45 days or so on whether he's going to veto those measures or not.
So Chris, on this notion of fast-tracking bills, there really is not a need, from my point of view, to necessarily fast-track anything, because things are in motion. The dispensary applications have gone in. The department is going to be deliberating over them over the next 4 months. When the 8 are chosen, there will likely be all kinds of other things that are happening. There might be lawsuits. There might be there's probably going to be the likelihood of dispensaries moving forward. So there's a lot that's going to be happening that doesn't necessarily need legislation. Now, for some of the measures that if they get passed, So for example, if we expand the the conditions, when we expanded the conditions to include PTSD this last session, that took effect immediately when we passed the bill and the governor signed it. So there might be some things that get into law very quickly and become effective very quickly. But for some of these more structural changes, there are already changes that are proposed to be phased in. So I don't think that the Senator's proposal to add new dispensaries to the island of Hawaii is going to happen immediately. It's going to be within 6 months or a year's time. And the reality is that I know people have been chomping at the bit, but as we may disagree with some of the things that the Department of Health has done, they have moved at incredible breakneck speed for government. Typically they write rules in 2 years. They wrote rules in 4 months. 4 months. In other states, it has taken them 2 years to go from application to identification of an applicant and a winner. In Maryland, they were supposed to have dispensaries up now. They postponed because they couldn't get through the applications. So I think it's very important to, one, cut the Department of Health a little bit of slack, let them do their work, get the aid up, and then we, as legislators, continue the discussion about the other changes that need to be made that are in our authority, and then let us work it out. And I think it requires a little bit of patience, but I think at the end of the day, what's going to happen is we will have a better industry if we are patient.
Yeah, I think Department of Health deserves a little bit more support. Certainly, as you said, fast track not only the rules, but really forming the committees and even the deadlines that they're up against to accept applications and announce the awardees and provide the opportunity for dispensaries to be operational is pretty phenomenal. So maybe a very quiet round of applause for them from this audience. Very good, there you go. Espero. So just a couple more things that we can qualify or clarify while we have your attention, and then we'll go to the audience. We'll answer a few questions, then we'll invite everybody back to the Hawaii Dispensary Alliance booth just around the corner for a little meet and greet with Representative and Senator. We did talk about edibles. This is a little bit of a tough one. You're probably going to have to call somebody out on this, and we are asking, where is the resistance for edibles coming from the insider's perspective, if you can provide?
From Weight Watchers Anonymous.
From Weight Watchers Anonymous. Very good.
That's a joke, folks.
No, we all know that everybody is very inclined to participate in the industry. And with the super lono grinds that are available here, everyone wants to get in on the edibles platform or on that front. So where's the resistance coming from? But then ultimately, beyond that, how can the patients or anyone else that has interest in getting involved in the industry, how can they get in? And that may not be for you to decide or for you to determine, but you may have an insider, at least an answer to that.
So from the insider perspective, I'll be very honest, the resistance is coming from folks who are very concerned about edibles getting to the hands of children. And I will say this because you all saw it. During Halloween, this past Halloween, there were reports of kids going into the ERs and they had packages of very nice little marijuana cookies. That is unacceptable. That is black market. That is what I do not want to see. I care about patients, but when you have Halloween bags of candies with little kids getting cookies that say medical cannabis made in Hawaii, that is not cool. I have my 5-year-old daughter here. I talked to her about medicine. If a candy ended up in her bag, I would be pissed off. So you want to know where the resistance is coming from? I am one of the biggest opponents of it if it means widespread use and accessibility to children. Now, I'll take a step back. I am a supporter. I was one of the very first people to say in working groups, you drink cough syrup. You have gummy bears that are medicine. So we have to figure out a way to make those edibles available. I'm all for those edibles. I'll be the first one to stand up for everyone here. I'm the first one to stand up and say, let's get the sprays, the sublingual sprays. People view that as an edible. We should get that, but the industry has to be responsible. And when you see those cookies or those brownies in someone's bag, in a child's hand, you have to stand up and say that is unacceptable. And if this industry doesn't stand up and say that, then you're not going to get my support.
And she's absolutely right. But at the end of the day, we're talking about packaging, really, right? Packaging. Not only packaging, but being a responsible adult, right? You're not going to leave your edibles in the refrigerator, just like you don't leave your prescription drugs on the kitchen table. You don't leave your gun by the television. You don't leave the tequila in the bathroom. I don't know, wherever you leave it. My whole point is though, some of these groups that are opposed though are sometimes yes. Because, I mean, let's face it, it's basically the people that have been obstacles in the whole medical marijuana program and system has been law enforcement and many conservatives, okay? These are probably the same people who think Obama is still a Muslim, okay? So, you can see what we're dealing with sometimes. But what the representative said is clearly true. Many parents are concerned, but it's really about how we package, and that's not going to take a rocket scientist to figure out the right way to package, the right way to give instructions, and the right way to say, here's what you do once you have your medicine.
All right, let's switch gears just real quickly. Obviously, we're reaching out to the medical community here. We have a lot of patients in the audience, a lot of people that want to become patients. What securities are afforded to those certified patients from the legal perspective? Where they live, where they work, how they imbibe their medicine. Can they be fired? Can they be evicted? Can their medicine be confiscated?
So, for the issue of being fired or from your jobs, no state has fixed that or addressed that. That is, as a patient, just as if you were a user, you're a patient using opioids, you can be tested, you can be drug tested, and you can likely be fired. There are no protections for that. We are looking, and we have had the discussions about protections for people who, for their home situations, for living in condos, but again, it's still very difficult to have to address those issues. I think the way that, one of the ways to deal with some of those is that science has to catch up with us. Science has to be able to produce better tests so we know when people are impaired and when they are not. Many patients are not impaired and they will test positive. So in some ways there's really no legal relief that we can provide at this time. I think one area where we see relief coming from is if there is changes at the federal level with the acceptance of more states accepting medical marijuana, we may see the movement to deschedule take root, and then that's important to follow up with. But that's something that we cannot do here at the state level. That's something that's going to take congressional movement, presidential movement, executive authority, and this is where I'll make a pitch. The next president of the United States can hold the hands of his industry in their hands with respect to scheduling.
Yes, sadly we need to rely on the federal government to to move the whole industry and the whole debate forward, because marijuana, as you know, is still Schedule 1, but you also know it doesn't belong in Schedule 1 because it does have medicinal value. So that's really one of the contradictions of the law and the thinking. Now the good news is in the last budget bill, the Congress did insert in that budget the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment. And in that amendment, they made it clear that the Department of Justice and the DEA cannot use their federal funds to go after dispensaries and patients where there are clear, bona fide state laws, and as long as these dispensaries and the patients are in compliance of those state laws. So that was a huge, huge amendment that Congress did pass. And they did pass it because when you look at the financial part of this, it's huge. We're talking tens of hundreds, if not billions of dollars. And Congress is going to be forced to take this up strictly because of that financial aspect. When you've got almost half of the states that have passed legislation on medical marijuana, and now we have 4 states who have legalized it, and possibly by the end of this year there could be another half a dozen states that have legalized marijuana. So the train is moving, the ball is rolling. Just like same-sex marriage, it's not going to stop. We're going to move forward on this. Okay? It's coming full circle. Let me share this real quickly. You know, the 13 colonies used to grow hemp. They were mandated to grow hemp as an export product to send back to Europe. One of the first flags that Betsy Ross made was made out of hemp. And hemp was legal and used throughout the growth of our country. It is part of the fabric of America, hemp. So what happened was Congress in the 1920s, big business said, we need to stop hemp because hemp was the competitor to Randall Hearst of the Hearst fortune, where he had his money tied in forests. And what did he want to do with this forest? He wanted to make paper. And what did he want to do with his paper? He wanted the newspapers around the nation to use this newspaper. And who was he competing with his forest? The hemp industry. And big bucks and the millionaires, they killed the hemp industry, and with the hemp industry, they killed the marijuana industry. And tied to that as well was a name back then called DuPont. DuPont. See, Henry Ford wanted to build his cars with hemp, and he wanted to fuel them with hemp. But DuPont had this thing called plastic. And plastic competed with what? Hemp. And you could build just about everything and anything out of it. So that's just a little history, if I may. I like sharing that because a lot of people don't understand how this is illegal. But we're finally coming full circle, starting in the 60s when that crowd, our grandparents and some of you maybe, and from the 60s and 70s and 80s to now, it's evolved where literally legalization now is a serious discussion on multiple states throughout our nation, let alone the world, and what's going on. I'm suggesting to my colleagues that one day we take a trip to Portugal. Because as you may know, Portugal has decriminalized all of their drugs. And from what we're hearing, there are some outstanding results that have come from this decriminalization. Results which have benefited their society. Results which have decreased the use of drugs, not only amongst adults, but our youth as well. So we need to get this anal thinking out of some of our legislators and policy decision makers' minds and really look what is in the best interest so we're not spending tens of millions of dollars on the war against drugs. Thank you.
Very inspirational, Senator. Thank you. All right, we're going to open this up real quickly to a few.
Be evicted because of the tenant landlord situation. But what I'm asking is on assisted living in care homes, can a care home or an assisted living facility evict a tenant if they have a medical marijuana card? Is that ever been addressed?
That has not been addressed, so that might be something. But I think for assisted living home, because they have to comply with federal laws, they would not allow that. So to protect their license, they would be entitled to ask that that not be used there. But I don't know that a test case has been used in that case.
Now, I believe that they could probably say, we don't want you smoking cannabis in our facility. But that doesn't mean you can't take it other ways. But as she said, I don't know if there's been a test case on that where just because you have a card, they can evict you. I don't think that they can legally do that. But I'd have to look at what's happened actually.
Paul, you'll have an opportunity to speak to the representative and senator at the booth over here. Paul, we'll speak with you in private a little bit later about the issue.
Senator Espero, on your efforts and your action, thank you so much. There are three main questions that I think need to be addressed, in my humble opinion. That is a lab testing. The tests going to be handled on each island, or they're going to be central to Oahu. If the latter, address the transport issue. Number two, the banking issue. That is a huge one. There is no bank in the state of Hawaii currently that will work with anybody in the marijuana business. Number three is the greenhouse issue. Right now, any applicant right now is faced with a multi-million-dollar price tag to put up a building that the Department of Health is calling for.
He mentioned three items, banking, transportation and labs, and greenhouses. We're fully aware of all three of those. There may be legislation regarding the lab testing that Rep. Della mentioned. There may be legislation on the greenhouses, and we're working with the DOH on the greenhouses. The banking, though, is going to be a little more trickier. I don't have the answer to that. I had this idea, and I don't have any idea whether it worked or not, because Canada right now is looking at legalization, right? Canada. And my just thinking off the top of my head is, could we find a Canadian bank that would issue a credit card and have that credit card be the way that we use to pay for our medical? I don't know, but because of the federal banking laws, all of the states are trying to figure this out. But as I mentioned, because we're talking billions of dollars Wall Street and the banking industry cannot ignore this. They have to look at it, or else there's going to be a criminal factor and a black market due to that cash that's just laying around. So hopefully at our congressional level, we need to work them really hard on the banking side. Yes, ma'am, Ellen.
Is that good? Okay. Can you hear? My question is, at the end of the legislative session last year, House Bill 321 was passed, and it went into conference. And that's where the House and the Senate resolved their differences in companion bills or come to some kind of like line. And there was a queue, and Josh was out, and Les came in, and Will moved up, and so here we have it. But somehow, I think the overall concerns from people that I'm hearing from in the community and connected with neighborhood boards and all kind of stuff is that out of conference came a vertical integration scheme that was not there in the House bill. And so, in effect, what has happened is people have to have somewhere $6 to $20 million per staff, okay? And so I think with the exception of two groups that have applied for dispensaries, the rest all came in with outside money, Wall Street money, Vegas money, and all of that coming in here. So there's really, I guess the question is, why did you set it up that way that would require everybody else's money to come in to finance, and then they're going to take the profits, the investors, back to New York, back to Seattle.
Well, that's not true. I mean, first of all, you're assuming that Hawaii people are poor, and Hawaii people are not poor. There are businessmen, there are people who have money, local people who want to invest, and that's what we have done. You see, there were a couple models we could look at, the horizontal, the vertical. At the end of the day, we had to make a decision, and the decision was vertical. I had my own preferences on how we do things. It didn't pass, but the bottom line is we're going to have dispensaries in July, okay? So that's the main goal. And with my legislation on going horizontal in the future, we could change that, Ellen, if we were able to, and we're hoping that we could change it. But the money is important because we want to make sure that since there's only limited licenses, that these businesses succeed. We don't want to be able to give these licenses and people fail, and the financial arm, whether you agree with it or not, is important for the investment to make certain that these are basically pharmacies that are being established, and you can't open a pharmacy on a shoestring budget, but we could talk more about that.
I would also say, this is just a little insider's kind of knowledge. What was on the table from the Senate would have been one licensee for all 8. One licensee. So what we ended up with, which is basically 8 different licenses, was a huge improvement. I think what we learned from this... Anyway, that was the Senate position. Now, one senator's position, that was a Senate position. I think it's really important that as we move forward, that the horizontal conversation is very important, because that is where I do see more local businesses being able to become involved. And at the end of the day, any business that does want to get involved has to have some amount of capital. Maybe not the 1.2 billion that's going to be expended initially, but there will have to be discussions about, is there a more reasonable threshold?
I mean, in my horizontal system, the dollar amount to invest would be, I don't even have a dollar amount in my bill right now. So next question, we got to go on.
I'm sorry, sir, I'm going to have to cut you off right there. Senator, I'm going to have to cut you off. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could, a round of applause for Senator Espero, Representative Belatti.
We'll talk meet you at the booth if you want.
We're going to be in the Hawaii Dispensary Alliance booth right around the corner. How about a round of applause for organizers 2016 Hawaii Cannabis Expo. Congratulations, everybody. We've made it. Big hurdles are clear. Future is bright. We see you around the corner. Aloha.